In 1888, a series of murders in London shocked the world. The killer targeted women in Whitechapel. The crimes were violent, deliberate, and carried out within a matter of weeks. And to this day, the case remains officially unsolved. Over the years, hundreds of suspects have been proposed. Some theories seem convincing at first glance. Others fall apart under scrutiny. And to this day, the big question remains: who was Jack the Ripper? On the morning of August 7, 1888, tenant John Reeves left his apartment for work, only to be stopped on the first-floor landing by a horrifying sight: the body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. Terrified, he rushed down to the street to call for help. Constable Thomas Barrett was the first officer to arrive, quickly followed by Dr. Timothy Killeen, who examined the body. The woman had been stabbed 39 times, most wounds focused on her chest and abdomen. Dr. Killeen estimated that she had been dead for about 3 hours, pointing to a time of death around 2:30 in the morning. Oddly, none of the tenants reported hearing any struggle. One exception was Amy Hewitt, who said she heard a single cry of murder the previous evening, though it had come from outside the building. She added that violent cries were not unusual in the area. The victim was identified as Martha Tabram, a 39-year-old mother of 2 who had long separated from her husband. She lived in a nearby lodging house at 19 George Street and earned a living as a prostitute. Her friend, Mary Ann Connolly, testified that on the evening of August 6, she and Tabram spent time drinking with 2 soldiers. Around midnight, the group split. Connolly guided her client down Angel Alley, while Tabram went toward George Yard. That was the last anyone saw her alive. Investigators questioned the soldiers, but each had a verifiable alibi. Inspector Edmund Reed decided to drop the soldier line of inquiry. Even in a district accustomed to crime, the sheer savagery of Tabram's murder was shocking. The final inquest, held on August 23rd, described the crime as one of the most brutal in years, with the attack on a defenseless woman almost beyond belief. In the early hours of August 31st, Robert Paul left his home on Foster Street, heading to work, when he noticed a man standing in the middle of Bucks Row. That man, Charles Cross, had also been on his way to work when he spotted a woman lying on the pavement. Cross called to Paul,
"Come and see, there's a woman down here."
They spotted Constable John Neal around the corner. Neal found her lying on her back, a deep cut across her throat, still bleeding. Parts of her body were still warm. Shortly after 4 a.m., Dr. Reese Llewellyn examined the body. He concluded that she had likely been killed no more than 30 minutes earlier. The examination revealed something terrifying. Beyond the cuts in her throat, her abdomen had multiple slashes. She had been disemboweled, though no organs were removed. Dr. Llewellyn noted that the wound suggested the attacker had at least some knowledge of human anatomy, deliberately targeting vital areas. The victim was Mary Ann Nichols, who had just turned 43. She was a mother of at least 6 children, living in a common lodging house at 56 Flower and Dean Street. On the night she died, Nichols had been turned away from another lodging house for not having enough money. Trying to raise funds, she had wandered the streets seeking clients. That night, she briefly met her friend Ellen Holland, who saw her staggering along Whitechapel Road around 2:30 a.m., the last sighting before her death. The killer left nothing behind. No weapon, no blood trail, no witnesses. Yet for those watching the events unfold, The parallels with the murder of Martha Tabram were unmistakable. Both victims were women of similar age, both involved in prostitution, and both attacked with shocking violence. Tabram had been stabbed repeatedly. Nichols had been slashed. The differences were minor. What mattered was the pattern, a method, a brutality that suggested a single deranged individual was now stalking the East End. And so, Whitechapel found itself on edge once more, the shadows of its streets hiding a killer who had already shown just how merciless he could be. September 8th, 4:45 a.m. John Richardson stopped by the property before heading to work. His mother was a tenant there, and he routinely checked the cellar door after a previous break-in. He walked through the front entrance, down the narrow hallway, and into the backyard. Finding the cellar secure, he sat on the back steps and used a small knife to trim a loose piece of leather from his boot. When he finished, he left and closed the backyard door behind him. About an hour later, shortly before 6 a.m., another tenant, John Davis, came downstairs. He noticed the backyard door was open. When he stepped into the backyard, he saw her. A woman was lying on her back near the steps. Inspector Joseph Chandler and Dr. George Phillips arrived at 6:30 a.m. What they encountered was described as terribly mutilated. The woman's throat had been cut deeply. Her abdomen had been completely opened. Her intestines had been removed and placed over her shoulder. Portions of her abdomen were missing, including the womb. The victim was identified as Annie Chapman, around 47 years old. She had given birth to at least 7 children. She had been living at a lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. On the night of September 7th, she had been turned away for not having the money to pay for a bed. The night watchman escorted her out. She disappeared into the darkness shortly after. What happened between then and sunrise remains uncertain, but unlike the previous murders, this case came with potential witness. Albert Kadosh testified that around 5:20 a.m., while in the yard of the neighboring property at 27 Hanbury Street, he heard a woman say, "No." A few minutes later, he heard something strike the wooden fence separating the yards. Tenants had windows overlooking the yard. Some had slept with them open, yet no one reported seeing the attack, and the killer escaped unnoticed. By now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. 3 women, same district, similar circumstances, increasing brutality. Public fear intensified, and frustration followed. Newspapers openly mocked the authorities. One American publication declared that the London police were probably the stupidest in the world. Cartoons and editorials painted them as incompetent. But what those headlines failed to acknowledge were the realities of Whitechapel. The district was overcrowded beyond measure. Police were understaffed. The killer left no weapon, almost no witnesses, and no clear motive. And before the month was over, that invisibility would prove deadlier than ever. September 30th, Saturday night. Around 12:50 a.m., Louis Dimschutz, a club steward, drove his horse and carriage into Dutfield's yard. The pony suddenly veered to the left, and when Dimschutz looked down, he saw something dark against the wall. Lighting a match, he realized it was a woman lying on her side. He alerted the others. Within moments, a small crowd gathered. The scene was grisly. The woman's throat had been fearfully cut, and a stream of blood trickled down the yard. The victim was soon identified as Elizabeth Stride, 44, a Swedish immigrant who had lived in London for over 20 years. Widowed, she earned her living through prostitution and had been seen by several witnesses that night. First, she was spotted around 11 p.m. with a respectably dressed man. At 11:50 p.m., she was talking to another man, described as a clerk. Minutes before her death, Constable William Smith saw her with yet another man carrying a small parcel wrapped in newspaper. Whether these were multiple clients or the same person remains unclear. Most compelling of all was the testimony of Israel Schwartz. Around 12:45 a.m., a man threw a woman to the ground just outside Dutfield's yard. She screamed 3 times, but not loudly. Schwartz did not intervene. A second man, lighting a pipe across the street, was also present. The attacker shouted "Lipsky" to him. Some officials initially suspected an accomplice named Lipsky, but Inspector Frederick Aberline had a different view. Lipsky was a derogatory reference to Israel Schwartz's Jewish appearance, a slur popularized by the 1887 murder case of Israel Lipsky. Whether this interpretation was correct or not can't be known for certain. Less than a kilometer away, the horror continued. By 1:30 a.m., Mitre Square was empty, patrolled routinely by Constable Edward Watkins. Within minutes, it became a crime scene. At 1:44 a.m., Watkins saw a woman lying on her back. Dr. George Sequeira and Dr. Frederick Brown soon arrived. Dr. Brown noted that the right ear had been cut obliquely. Both concluded she had been killed only minutes before discovery. Her throat was slashed, her abdomen ripped open, intestines drawn out over her right shoulder. The victim was Catherine Eddowes, 46, who had at least 5 children and lived at 55 Flower and Dean Street. Earlier that night, she had been heavily intoxicated and briefly detained at a police station before being released at 1 a.m. She may have been seen with a man resembling a sailor, wearing a reddish handkerchief. This sighting was only 10 minutes before her body was found by Watkins. The killer had narrowly escaped detection. The square was overlooked by a private residence occupied by a police family, a night watchman, and patrolling officers, yet none witnessed the murder. A torn piece of Eddowes' apron was found near a building a few blocks northeast, bloodstained and discarded by the killer. Above it, someone had scrawled the chilling message: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Who wrote it and why remains unknown. Was it the killer, an attempt to mislead, or simply unrelated? Similar questions would soon arise regarding letters supposedly sent to the press, claiming responsibility for the murders. Just days before the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, the Central News Agency in London received a letter. The author claimed responsibility for the recent killings and hinted at a next job already in the works. Then, in the immediate aftermath of the 2 deaths, the same agency received a blood-smeared postcard. It contained chilling details about the attacks, which the writer described as a double event. The police faced a difficult decision. Were these letters genuine or just hoaxes? They chose to make them public, hoping that someone might recognize the handwriting. No one ever did. Yet, the letter succeeded in one way. They introduced the name Jack the Ripper to the world. Opinions on their authenticity were divided then and continue to be debated today. The most famous of these is the Dear Boss letter, in which he made a startling claim. The writer promised to clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police. No such package ever arrived, and neither Stride nor Eddowes had their ears removed. Though some have wondered if the slashed right earlobe of Eddowes was a botched attempt to fulfill this gruesome promise, or simply another of the many horrific lacerations inflicted that night. Modern linguistic analysis suggests that all these letters were written by the same hand. Interestingly, it bore no resemblance to the crude message scrawled above the torn apron patch left at Mitre Square. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, received a small box in the post. Along with a letter, the box contained half a human kidney. Doctors confirmed it was indeed human, though they could not verify whether it belonged to Catherine Eddowes. The letter's author insisted it was her kidney and claimed to have eaten the other half. These letters dominated the news. Every major paper in London covered them, and they shaped public discourse throughout October 1888. Yet, despite the notoriety, no further murders bearing the Ripper's signature occurred that month. Some dare to hope the reign of terror was over. On the morning of November 9th, John McCarthy, a merchant and landlord of Miller's Court, was going over his bookkeeping. Room 13, occupied by a tenant who had fallen behind on rent, was on his mind. He sent his assistant, Thomas Boyer, to collect the arrears around 10:45 a.m. After knocking twice with no reply, Boyer circled the building to peer through a window. The view was partially blocked by a coat or curtain, so he reached through a broken pane to move it aside, and that's when he saw her. A woman's severely mutilated body lying in a corner of the sparsely furnished room. Police swarmed the Miller's Court immediately, but the door to room 13 had to be forced open with a pickaxe. What they found inside was horrifying. Dr. George Phillips described it as cut all to pieces, while Dr. Thomas Bond said her face had been hacked beyond recognition. The abdomen had been emptied of its viscera, and the throat severed all around down to the bone. Loose organs were scattered across the room, turning the scene into something out of a nightmare. The victim was quickly identified as Mary Jane Kelly, the tenant of room 13. Kelly was likely of Welsh or Irish descent and in her mid-20s, making her the youngest of the Ripper's canonical victims. Up until a few days before the murder, she had lived with Joseph Barnett, a man she separated from on October 30th due to his disapproval of her profession and associates. They did meet again briefly on the evening of November 8th, though accounts conflict regarding the timing and circumstances. That night, Kelly was spotted by her neighbor Mary Ann Cox in the company of a woman who was leaving, and later with a man around midnight, apparently heading into her room. Cox noted that Kelly was very much intoxicated, but still singing inside her room about an hour later. By 2 a.m., Kelly had been seen outside again by George Hutchinson. He observed Kelly walking with a well-dressed man, carrying gloves and a small parcel. He followed them to Miller's Court, noting that the man handed Kelly a red handkerchief and heard her say, "All right, my dear, come along, you will be comfortable." Hutchinson stayed nearby until 3 a.m., but neither returned. Around 4 a.m., cries of murder were reportedly heard by a tenant above and a woman across the courtyard, though others heard nothing. Mary Jane Kelly is widely regarded as the final victim of Jack the Ripper. The sudden end of the murders raises countless questions. Did the Ripper stop out of fear of capture? Was he imprisoned, fallen ill, or even dead? Did he leave England or change his methods to mislead authorities? With so many possibilities, the list of suspects remains long, and the mystery endures. Following the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, a rumor began circulating about a figure known as Leather Apron, said to have been preying on local prostitutes. The nickname quickly reached the press and became synonymous with the killer. Before the name Jack the Ripper appeared, Leather Apron dominated the headlines. However, the man identified as Leather Apron, John Pizer, was soon cleared of all suspicion. He had been in a different part of London on the night Nichols was murdered. This episode is emblematic of the broader investigation. The police pursued leads of every kind, often tenuous and unsubstantiated, under intense public pressure. Thousands were interviewed, hundreds of premises searched, and countless theories developed. The authorities concluded that the Ripper was likely a strong, middle-aged man of respectable appearance, of average height and medium to stout build, typically wearing dark clothing and a hat. With this profile in mind, the police examined a variety of suspects. John Richardson, the witness from the Chapman case who sat on the backyard steps to trim his boot leather, was investigated because his presence was near the scene. However, his connection was purely circumstantial. He lived at the same address with his mother, and he was quickly cleared. George Hutchinson, who followed Mary Jane Kelly after she was accosted by a well-dressed man, was questioned due to his proximity to the events. Despite uncertainty over his motives for observing the pair, his testimony was considered credible, and no evidence implicated him. Charles Cross, who discovered the body of Mary Ann Nichols, was suggested by some modern theorists as a potential suspect. This was based on the relatively minor severity of Nichols' wounds, possibly because he was interrupted by the arrival of Robert Paul. Nevertheless, no concrete evidence ever linked him to the murders. The first seriously considered suspect in the Ripper case would later be Joseph Barnett. Joseph Barnett was the man who had lived with Mary Jane Kelly until a few days before her murder. The couple reportedly met around April of 1887 and eventually moved into 13 Miller's Court. Barnett worked as a fish porter, but between July and August of 1888, he lost his employment for reasons that remain unclear. Following this, Barnett and Kelly struggled to pay rent, and Kelly returned to prostitution. Those who speculate that Barnett might have been the Ripper point to his job loss as a potential turning point. The theory suggests that Barnett, overwhelmed with guilt for driving Kelly back to the streets, embarked on a spree of killings, targeting local prostitutes as a twisted attempt to frighten Kelly. While this interpretation is speculative, it aligns with Barnett's own disapproval of Kelly's work. He stated, "Kelly never went on the streets when she lived with me. She would never have gone wrong again if it had not been for the prostitutes stopping by the house." The brutal murder of Kelly, her body being the most mutilated of all the canonical victims, has fueled this theory. Barnett reportedly visited Kelly on November 8th, and according to him, they parted on friendly terms. He claimed to have returned home, played cards until 12:30 a.m., and then gone to bed. Kelly is believed to have been killed in the early hours of November 9th, leaving the possibility that Barnett could have returned to Miller's Court after midnight. The most intriguing aspects of Kelly's murder is the locked door. When the police arrived, they had to force entry with a pickaxe. The question arose, how could the killer have locked the door behind him? Barnett claimed that the key to room 13 had been missing for some time, and he and Kelly would routinely open the door by reaching through a broken window. So the killer might have observed Kelly using the window trick and employed the same method to secure the door. Joseph Barnett remained in the East End until his death in 1926 at age 68, never formally charged with the murder. While Barnett naturally attracted suspicion as someone close to Kelly, Victorian detectives also explored other possibilities. One prominent theory suggested that Jack the Ripper suffered from insanity, with Aaron Kosminski often cited as a prime suspect in that category. The investigation into the Whitechapel murders was overseen by several senior officers of the Metropolitan Police, including Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson, and Melville McNaughton. Upon his retirement, Anderson repeatedly claimed with certainty that Jack the Ripper had been identified. He stated, "There was no doubt whatever as to the identity of the criminal. I am almost tempted to disclose the identity of the murderer, but no public benefit would result from such a course." He never publicly disclosed the suspect's name, but he described them as a low-class Polish Jew who was safely caged in an asylum. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson revealed that the suspect's surname was Kosminsky, while Melville McNaughton described him as a homicidal and misogynistic resident of Whitechapel. Records confirm that an Aaron Kosminski was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1891. He was Polish, Jewish, and had lived in Whitechapel. Kosminski suffered from auditory hallucinations. Once institutionalized, he was deemed harmless, generally quiet, well-behaved, and apathetic, though he had previously threatened his sister with a knife. The case against Kosminsky largely relies on Anderson, Swanson, and McNaughton's accounts. However, inconsistencies exist. McNaughton stated the suspect had been removed to a lunatic asylum about March 1889, yet Aaron Kosminski was first confined in 1891 and spent nearly 20 decades in care before dying in 1919 at the age of 53. Swanson claimed the suspect died shortly after he was institutionalized, which clearly does not align with Aaron's life. Such discrepancies could reflect lapses in memory, as these accounts were written years or decades after the events. In 2011, Aaron Kosminski has resurfaced as a prime suspect due to DNA analysis of a shawl allegedly recovered from Catherine Eddowes' crime scene. Mitochondrial DNA extracted from the shawl reportedly matched maternal descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminski. Headlines declared the case definitively solved, identifying Kosminski as Jack the Ripper. Yet the findings are highly controversial. Mitochondrial DNA is passed along the female line and is not unique, meaning thousands could share the same sequence, meaning that, based on mitochondrial DNA, one can only exclude a suspect. While Kosminski remained the possible suspect, investigators soon turned their attention to another figure, against whom the level of suspicion was far more intense. 2 days before Mary Jane Kelly was brutally murdered, an American physician named Francis Tumblety was arrested in London. By all accounts, Tumblety was an eccentric character. Born in Ireland around 1833 and raised in the United States, he advertised himself as the Indian herb doctor, promising cures for everything from dyspepsia and scurvy to cancer and blindness, using nothing but medicinal herbs. Tumblety's career was riddled with legal troubles. He faced accusations for theft, assault, inducing miscarriages, and even the manslaughter of a patient. In the early 1860s, Tumblety allegedly hosted a lavish all-male dinner in Washington, expressing intense hatred of women, and displayed a cabinet filled with anatomical specimens. Some claim to include female wombs of every class. In 1869, he traveled to England for the first time, roaming the streets of London until he knew them intimately. He called himself the Great American Doctor and had several run-ins with the police. On November 7, 1888, Tumblety was arrested in London, reportedly on suspicion of being Jack the Ripper. 2 days later, Mary Jane Kelly was murdered, though it is unclear whether he was still in custody or released on bail. Ultimately, he was charged with 4 counts of gross indecency, unrelated to the murders. Rather than face trial, Tumblety fled England aboard a steamship under a false name, returning to the United States. He was pursued and monitored by detectives, but his offenses were deemed non-extraditable. Tumblety's profile seems, at first glance, to fit the Ripper: a misogynist, a physician familiar with anatomy, and allegedly a collector of female organs. But he was older and taller than the men described by witnesses. He was reportedly an enormous man with flamboyant, militaristic clothing, hardly the type to move undetected through the streets of Whitechapel. Chief Inspector John Littlechild regarded Tumblety as a very likely suspect. On paper, he had motive, opportunity, and the anatomical knowledge required. Each suspect carries only ambiguity and circumstance, leaving the door open for debate. In a city as vast as London, the largest metropolis of its time, with the busiest port in the world, it was easy for an ordinary individual to vanish into the crowd, blending in like a grain of sand. The truth may never be known. All that remains are fragments: the victims, the streets they walked, and the chilling legacy of a killer who, more than a century later, continues to haunt the imagination.